As you are all aware, our great friend of this house, Ed Burdick, passed away this morning. And I'd like to share with some of the members that are newer here just some thoughts about Ed Burdick. And I was reading through a lot of material today regarding our former chief clerk. And I thought to best sum up to new members here that never served with Ed Burdick, a House resolution that was passed is House Resolution number 1. It was 2005, and it was from former Speaker Swigum, former member Majority Leader Paulson, and former Minority Leader Matt Intenza. And if I could just share that with you, I think it'll give a lot of members a little perspective on our good friend's passing. A House resolution congratulating and honoring Edward A. Burdick on his retirement after 62 years of distinguished service to the Minnesota House of Representatives. Whereas on February 15, 1941, at a time when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was President of the United States, Harold E. Stassen was the governor of the state of Minnesota, and 10 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, young Eddie Burdick left Vernon Center, Minnesota, and his job as a printer's devil for his father's country newspaper, and was hired as a page for the Minnesota House of Representatives for $5.50 a day. And whereas in 1943, Ed became the head page and then worked in the chief clerk's office in 1945 before beginning his long and legendary tenure at the House desk in 1947, where he labored every session since, with the exception of one session when he was in the military service of this great country. Whereas Ed Burdick became the first full-time legislative employee in 1955, was elected chief clerk in 1967, and has been unanimously re-elected every session since. And whereas Ed's extensive knowledge of the legislative process and legislative procedure and his expertise on particular subjects such as germaneness, points of order, appeals, parliamentary inquiries, the previous question, and points of personal privilege enabled him to serve as teacher, mentor, and trusted friend for 16 different speakers, as well as over 1,000 legislators, and has allowed the Minnesota House to conduct its business in an orderly manner during some very tough and stressful times. And whereas Ed had processed over 80,953 bill introductions, and somebody said half of them were mine, but that's not true, and saw 23,268 new laws passed. And whereas Ed Burdick has been nationally recognized as a leading expert on parliamentary procedure and has received numerous awards from his peers from around the country. And whereas in 1971, Ed was elected president of the American Society of Legislative Clerks and Secretaries, and also served on the executive committee of the National Conference of State Legislators. Now therefore be it resolved by the Minnesota House of Representatives of the House of Representatives of the state of Minnesota that extends to Ed A. Burdick its deepest thanks and heartfelt appreciation for his many, many years of valuable service. And then on January 10th, 2010, there was a State of Minnesota proclamation signed by then Governor Pawlenty and then Secretary of State Mary Kiffmeyer, and it declared that January 10th, 2005 was Edward A. Burdick Day. So he had a day in his honor. Employee of the House for 62 years, chief clerk for 38 years. I just have to, if I could, share three very short stories with my relationship with Ed Burdick. I came in the House in 1991. Now, it's said that since Speaker Jennings was Speaker, every speaker from Jennings on said that Mr. Burdick could retire when they were done being Speaker. And so it wasn't until Speaker Swigum that he actually did then retire. Back when I was a freshman member back in 1991, there'd be a call of the House. I didn't know what that was, but it sounded pretty important. That light went on up there and you had to sit in your seat. And if you weren't in your seat and you didn't vote, then the speaker would say, please call the roll. And so there was one time when Representative Kahn wasn't at her seat at the time, and I remember him saying, Kahn, Kahn, Kahn. And I thought, that's pretty cool. I thought it was. And so what I did one time, we had to call the House, and I was sitting at my desk over there, and, waiting for everybody to vote. Well, I didn't vote because I wanted to hear, and he did it so beautifully, Davids, 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 and then I voted. But I think my favorite thoughts of Ed Burdick was my first year here. It was towards the end of the session. It was at the end of the session, and we had to be done by midnight, or everybody turned into pumpkins or something, but you had to be done at midnight. And it got to be 10 o'clock, and then it was 10:15, and then it was 10:32, and then it was 11:05, and then it was 11:30. I'm going, we got a lot of stuff to do yet. And then it's 11:45, and then it's 11:57. And I'm going, how are we going to do this? We have 3 minutes, and it's midnight. And it got to be 12:01. And my side of the aisle over there, I'd never seen anything like it. There were like 40 some of us, and I just sat there. And all the Republicans were standing up, screaming, standing on their chairs, saying, Mr. Speaker, we're at time, we have to adjourn, sine die, Mr. Speaker. I'm going, wow, this is really something. And I will never forget, because Speaker Bob Vanasek, a great Speaker of the House, Speaker Bob Vanasek leaned forward and said, Mr. Chief Clerk Burdick, what time is it? And Ed Burdick turned around and said, Mr. Speaker, what time do you want it to be? And I have loved this place ever since. Excuse me. Ed Burdick loved this House of Representatives. In this House of Representatives, anyone that knew Ed loved him. Ed Burdick was a very, very good man. He was a very, very kind man, and I will miss my friend. I would like to, at this time, I would yield to my good friend, Representative Murphy from Hermantown.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Representative Zellers, Representative Davids. Ed Burdick was an example for us. From the first time that he explained the rules of the House and the order of how things ran. Sometimes we needed long workshops, sometimes shorter workshops. But the patience of the man when we ran up there in a tizzy because we weren't sure what to do next was always appreciated by all of us. But there were jokes that were played on Clerk Burdick too. And those times that you talked about the con, or the Davids, sometimes there would be outcries of Burdick. And somehow or another, the tenseness would leave. And there would be a new spirit, more of a united spirit. But Speaker Vanasek was a unique individual also. And in 88 or 89, whenever he appointed the House Restoration Committee, a bipartisan committee to put the House chambers back in the colors and the way it was in 1905 when Cass Gilbert designed it. We were to plan and execute the restoration of the House chambers. And one of our best guides in that was Chief Clerk Burdick. And one of our instructions from Speaker Vanasek was, make sure there's some lasting memorial or memory built in of Ed Burdick, for Ed Burdick, for all of us to know how important Ed Burdick was to us in the past and the present, and something lasting for the future. And we decided, after many, many discussions and a few good, hard arguments with the Capital Area Planning Board and with the Historical Society that said no, we decided that we wanted a bust of Ed Burdick. The hardest argument was with Ed Burdick, because in order for us to get a bust, an art object, he would have to agree. And finally, we worked with him and we interviewed artists. And we all came to a conclusion that Paul Granlund would do it the best. And Mr. Burdick agreed that Paul Granlund could do this. And it was many months in the making. And I found out later that one of the reasons it was because Paul Granlund and Ed Burdick would meet for lunch every week or so. And they just loved to have lunch together, and grew into a friendship. While this was going on, the argument still continued with the Capital Area Planning Board and the Historical Society. But the idea that this was a House chamber, the House space outside, where we had decided we wanted the chief clerk's memory to be, was ours to decide, won out. And at the unveiling of the bust in 1990, Ed Burdick said, maybe we have a problem because I am not prepared to announce that I'm going to die, or that I'm going to announce that I'm going to retire. Because that was the argument. We can't have a statue for a living person, and certainly not one that's not retired yet. And we were so glad that we won. Now, one of the things we had to do was the money did not come out of the restoration money, even though we came in under the estimate. Former members of the House of Representatives and present members of the House of Representatives and staffs all contributed for the money for the bust of Ed Burdick. And one of the reasons that Ed Burdick said yes was that what he said at the unveiling. The first time I saw this magnificent building, I fell in love with it and with the honorable people working here. And I'm still in awe of this building and its occupants. He leaves us a legacy. We remember him as we walk by his bust on a daily basis. But the legacy of a Minnesota citizen who loves the building he worked in, but more than anything, wanted to do his job the very best way he knew how, and that was helping us do our job the very best way we know how. Please stand.